Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Surface. Lewis Knight stood on the deck of the SS Meridian, watching the Atlantic stretch endlessly in every direction. 200 miles from the nearest shore, surrounded by nothing but gray water and grayer sky. He'd been a maritime engineer for 12 years, spending 6 months at a time on cargo vessels, and the isolation had never bothered him. It gave him time to think, to plan, to save money for his daughter's future. His phone rarely worked out here, but today it buzzed with enough signal to receive a call. Mr. Knight? This is Teresa Greer from Child Protective Services in Boston. Lewis's stomach dropped. CPS didn't call unless something was catastrophically wrong. We found your daughter, Kara. She's 9 years old, correct? Yes. What happened? Is she hurt? His knuckles whitened around the railing. She was discovered in an abandoned warehouse on Dorchester Avenue approximately 2 hours ago. Unconscious. Severe dehydration, hypothermia. Mr. Knight, when did you last speak to your wife? The world tilted. 3 days ago. Brief satellite call. She said everything was fine. Kara was at school. Your daughter never came home from school yesterday. The school called your home repeatedly. No answer. A teacher drove by your house. No one there. It's been 30 hours, Mr. Knight. In the background, Lewis heard the organized chaos of an emergency room. Paramedics shouting vitals. The whine of medical equipment. The sound of his daughter's life hanging by a thread. Where's Cassandra? Where's my wife? We haven't been able to locate her. We've tried all the numbers you listed as emergency contacts. Lewis's mind raced through the architecture of his life. He'd met Cassandra Wall 7 years ago at a maritime industry conference in Miami. She'd been a pharmaceutical sales rep, beautiful, charming, quick-witted. They'd married within a year. Kara came 10 months later. Everything had seemed perfect, or at least functional. Cassandra complained about his long absences, but he made good money. She'd quit her job to stay home with Kara. Or so he'd thought. I'm calling her now, Lewis said. Which hospital? Massachusetts General. Mr. Knight, I need to ask, has your wife shown any signs of neglect before? Never. He stopped. Actually, when he thought about it, Kara had been quieter during their video calls lately. Less excited to talk. And Cassandra had started dodging questions about Kara's schoolwork, her friends, her life. I'll be there as soon as I can. Tell Kara her daddy's coming. He hung up and immediately dialed Cassandra. She answered on the 4th ring. Music blared in the background. Club music, the deep bass of a Thursday afternoon party. Laughter. Male voices. Lewis. Baby. What's up? Where the fuck is Kara? Silence. The music didn't stop, but Cassandra's breathing changed. Kara? She's at school, isn't she? It's 4 in the afternoon, Cassandra. School ended 3 hours ago. More silence. Then, impossibly, oh shit. I forgot. Lewis had been in storms that nearly capsized cargo ships. He'd seen men swept overboard, watched shipping containers the size of houses break loose and crush equipment. He'd kept his cool through all of it. But those 3 words, oh shit, I forgot, shattered something fundamental in his chest. You forgot, he repeated, his voice deadly calm. You forgot our daughter. Lewis, listen, I can explain. She's in a coma, Cassandra. They found her in an abandoned building. Unconscious. Alone for 30 hours. The line went quiet except for the music. When Cassandra spoke again, her voice was different. Calculating. Is she going to be okay? No, I'm so sorry. Not I'm coming to the hospital. Just a clinical question about outcomes. I don't know, Lewis said. But I'm coming home. And when I get there, you better have a damn good explanation. It was an accident. 30 hours isn't an accident. It's abandonment. He ended the call and immediately dialed his captain. I need emergency leave. Family crisis. My daughter's in the hospital. Captain Gene Conley had sailed with Lewis for 6 years. Done. We'll dock in Halifax in 18 hours. I'll arrange a helicopter to meet us halfway. Thank you. Lewis? Whatever you're walking into, keep your head clear. You're smart. Don't let emotion make you stupid. But as Lewis went below to pack his duffel bag, he wasn't thinking about staying smart. He was thinking about the way Cassandra had laughed before answering the phone. The way she'd said, "I forgot," like she'd missed a grocery run, not left their daughter to die. He opened his laptop and started making calls. First to his lawyer, Stuart Moss, who'd handled his will and maritime contracts. Then to an old Navy buddy, Nelson Ramsey, who now worked in private security in Boston. Lewis Knight had spent 12 years learning how to solve complex mechanical problems under pressure, how to think 3 steps ahead when lives depended on it, how to be patient, methodical, and absolutely thorough. He was about to apply every single one of those skills to destroying his wife. Chapter 2. The Descent. The helicopter touched down at Logan Airport 17 hours later. Lewis hadn't slept. He'd spent the flight researching, documenting, calling in favors. His phone now contained a detailed timeline of Cassandra's social media activity over the past 6 months. Deleted posts he'd recovered through cached pages and screenshots from friends. She'd been living a completely different life. Nelson Ramsey waited at the helipad, a bull of a man with graying temples and the bearing of someone who'd seen combat. "Knight, car's ready. Fill me in." Lewis climbed into the black SUV. "I need surveillance on my house. Complete financial audit of my wife's accounts. And I need to know everywhere she's been in the last 72 hours. Already started. Your lawyer's meeting us at the hospital." Nelson pulled into traffic, his eyes on Lewis in the rearview mirror. "You look like hell, brother. My daughter's in a coma because her mother forgot she existed." It wasn't forgetting. Nelson handed him a tablet. "Your boy Stuart got a preliminary warrant. Pulled your wife's credit card statements. Look at Monday and Tuesday." Lewis scrolled through the charges. Monday, $437 at a boutique hotel in Cambridge. Room service, champagne, spa treatments. Tuesday, $856 at a casino in Connecticut. Multiple bar tabs. A jewelry purchase at 2:47 a.m. While Kara was lying in an abandoned warehouse, dying of exposure, Cassandra had been gambling and buying earrings. "There's more," Nelson said quietly. She wasn't alone. Guy named Tony O'Neill. Works in real estate, divorced, known for living above his means. They checked into that hotel as Mr. and Mrs. O'Neill. Lewis's hands didn't shake. He'd learned a long time ago that rage wasn't useful unless you could channel it into precision. How long? Text messages go back 11 months. Right around when you left for your last rotation. Nearly a year. Lewis had been sending money home, calling Kara every night he had satellite access, planning a future, and Cassandra had been building a parallel life with another man. The daughter, Lewis said. She knew, didn't she? 9-year-olds aren't stupid. Yeah, I bet money Kara knew something was wrong. Massachusetts General Hospital loomed ahead. Lewis was out of the car before it fully stopped, Nelson trailing behind with a folder of documents. Teresa Greer met them in the pediatric ICU waiting room, a tired woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a steel spine. "Mr. Knight, your daughter is stable but unconscious. The doctors are cautiously optimistic, but there may be neurological damage from the exposure. Can I see her?" "Of course. But first, I need to inform you that we've opened a formal investigation. The circumstances of Kara's abandonment suggest severe neglect at minimum, possibly criminal endangerment. Where is Mrs. Knight?" "I don't know and I don't care. What matters is Kara. Actually, it matters legally. We need to interview your wife. She hasn't responded to any of our calls." Stuart Moss arrived then, a sharp-dressed lawyer in his 40s with the reputation of a barracuda. "Lewis, I filed for emergency custody and a restraining order. Given the circumstances, we'll get it. But we need to move fast." "Do it." Teresa led Lewis through secured doors to a small room where machines beeped in rhythmic patterns. Kara looked impossibly small on the hospital bed, her dark hair matted, her face pale. IVs ran into both arms. A breathing tube had been removed, but the indentations remained on her cheeks. Lewis sat beside her and took her small hand. It was warm. That was something. "Hey, baby girl. Daddy's here. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." His voice cracked. "But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. And I promise you," he leaned close, whispering so only she could hear. "I promise you." She'll pay for this. Every second you were alone. Every moment you were scared. She'll pay for all of it. A nurse, Diana Hensley, entered to check vitals. She squeezed someone's hand earlier. The doctor thinks she can hear us. Kara, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand. Nothing. Then, the faintest pressure. Lewis's eyes burned. That's my girl. You fight. You're a knight. We're fighters. Diana smiled softly. I'll give you some privacy. The police want to speak with you when you're ready. 30 minutes later, Lewis sat across from Detective Hugo McNeil, a veteran cop with a weary face and sharp instincts. Mr. Knight, walk me through your timeline. When did you last see your daughter? 6 months ago, August 15th. I left for a rotation in the North Atlantic. I called home 3 to 4 times a week via satellite phone. Last spoke to Kara 3 days ago. And your wife? Same timeline. She seemed normal. Said Kara was doing well in school. Nothing seemed wrong. Did you notice any behavioral changes? In either of them. Lewis thought back. Kara was quieter lately. Less talkative. I thought maybe she was just getting older, more independent. I didn't think, he stopped. I should have known. You were 200 miles offshore. You trusted your wife. Hugo leaned forward. Between you and me, I got a daughter too. If someone did this to her, I'd burn the world down. But you seem calm. I am calm. That worries me. Lewis met his eyes steadily. I'm not going to do anything illegal, detective. I'm going to use the law. I'm going to use evidence. I'm going to methodically dismantle my wife's life until she loses everything. And it's all going to be completely above board. Hugo studied him. You're a smart guy, Mr. Knight. Keep it that way. After the detective left, Stewart pulled Lewis aside. We got the emergency custody order. Cassandra is officially barred from seeing Kara without supervision. But Lewis, there's something else. I pulled her phone records. She's been in contact with a lawyer too. Ronald Vaughn. He specializes in parental rights cases. She's going to fight for custody? Looks like it. And Vaughn's good. He'll spin this as a mental health episode, temporary insanity, postpartum depression, anything to make her sympathetic. Lewis looked through the window at his daughter, small and broken in that hospital bed. Let her try, he said quietly. I want her to fight, because when she loses, and she will lose, I want her to know she gave it everything and still failed. I want her to feel exactly how powerless Kara felt in that warehouse. Stewart nodded slowly. All right, then we prepare for war. Chapter 3, The Truth Beneath. 3 days passed. Kara woke up on the 4th morning, confused and frightened. The doctors said she'd been lucky. No permanent brain damage, though she'd need physical therapy for the muscle weakness from dehydration. But the psychological damage was harder to measure. Lewis hadn't left the hospital except to shower at Nelson's apartment. He was there when Kara opened her eyes, when she cried and asked why Mommy didn't come get her, when she finally fell back asleep clutching his hand. He was also there when Detective McNeil returned with new information. We found where your wife has been staying. A condo in Brookline. Belongs to Tony O'Neill. Let me guess, she's still there. Was. She checked into a different hotel yesterday. Paid cash. But here's the interesting part. Hugo slid a folder across the table. O'Neill's got a record. Nothing major. Fraud. Writing bad checks. Small-time grifts. The guy's a professional loser who's good at looking successful. Lewis flipped through police reports, financial documents. O'Neill had been married twice before, both divorces acrimonious, both wives claiming he manipulated them financially. You think he targeted Cassandra? Maybe. Or maybe they're two selfish people who found each other. Either way, there's a pattern here. O'Neill gets close to women with resources or access to resources. Your maritime contracts are worth what? $700,000 a year. About that. And your house in Newton is worth $1.2 million. I bought it before the market surge. Hugo nodded. So Cassandra has access to significant assets. O'Neill has a pattern of financial manipulation. You see where I'm going? Lewis saw it clearly. He wanted my money. Cassandra wanted my money. And Kara was in the way. We can't prove intent yet. But abandonment leading to child endangerment? That's a Class A felony in Massachusetts. 2 to 10 years. Stewart appeared in the doorway. Lewis, we've got a problem. Cassandra's lawyer filed an emergency motion claiming you're psychologically unfit due to prolonged isolation at sea. They're demanding a psychiatric evaluation before the custody hearing. On what grounds? They're claiming your work environment, 6 months of isolation, high stress, dangerous conditions, makes you potentially unstable. They've got an expert witness, some psychiatrist named Dr. Phyllis Conrad, who will testify that maritime workers show elevated rates of depression and dissociation. Nelson, who'd been listening silently, laughed once, sharp and bitter. That's bullshit. Lewis is the most stable person I know. Doesn't matter what's true, Stewart said. Matters what we can prove. Lewis, you'll need to submit to evaluation. Fine. Set it up. There's more. Cassandra's doing media interviews, playing the grieving mother. She gave a statement to Channel 7 claiming she had a mental breakdown, that she's seeking treatment, that she loves Kara and made a terrible mistake. Lewis stood and walked to the window. Below, news vans circled the hospital like sharks. She's building her narrative. Smart move on her part, Stewart admitted. Public sympathy could influence the judge. Then we counter it. Lewis turned to face them. Nelson, I need complete surveillance on O'Neill and Cassandra. Every conversation, every meeting. Legal methods only. I don't want anything thrown out of court. Already on it. Got 2 guys rotating shifts. Hugo, what do you need from me to strengthen the criminal case? The detective considered. Kara's statement. When she's ready. And we need to establish timeline and intent. The stronger we can make the case that this was deliberate neglect, not a mental health crisis, the better. Lewis nodded. Stewart, file a motion to compel Cassandra's financial records for the past year. Every transaction, every account. I want to see exactly where our money went. Over the next week, a picture emerged that made Lewis's blood run cold. Cassandra had opened 3 credit cards in her name only, maxing them out on luxury items and cash advances. Total debt of $68,000. She'd been withdrawing cash from their joint account in amounts just below $10,000 to avoid automatic reporting. 35 withdrawals over 7 months. She'd taken a second mortgage on their house without his knowledge, forging his signature, pulling out another $120,000. All of it had gone to funding her life with Tony O'Neill. But the worst discovery came from Nelson's surveillance team. You need to see this, Nelson said, pulling up a video on his laptop. The footage showed Cassandra and Tony at an outdoor cafe in Cambridge 3 weeks earlier. Audio was clear. Tony, she's going to be a problem. Kids always are. Cassandra, I know, but what am I supposed to do? Lewis sends money directly to the school, the pediatrician. I can't touch those accounts. Tony, there are solutions. Boarding schools. My ex sent her kids to one in Vermont. Year-round program. Cassandra, Kara would tell Lewis. She's a daddy's girl. Tony, then we wait until he's out to sea again. Tell him it was her idea. By the time he gets back, it's done. Lewis watched his wife discuss sending their daughter away, like she was a piece of furniture. There was no love there, no maternal instinct, just cold calculation. There's more, Nelson said quietly. From yesterday, new footage. Cassandra and Tony in a hotel room. Cassandra crying, but her tears looked performative. Cassandra, the lawyer says if I play this right, I can still get custody. Or at least joint custody, which means Lewis has to keep paying. Tony, what about the criminal charges? Cassandra, Vaughn thinks he can get it down to a misdemeanor. Community service, probation, maybe some mandated therapy. The key is making sure I look like a victim. Tony kissed her neck. You're brilliant. Cassandra laughed. I know. Lewis closed the laptop. His hands were steady, his voice calm. Can we use this in court? Some of it. The cafe conversation, definitely. The hotel room footage is trickier. Expectation of privacy. But Stewart can probably get it admitted under the abandonment investigation. Do it. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Lewis began phase 2 of his plan. He hired a forensic accountant, Alexander Garrison, who testified in dozens of fraud cases. Alexander spent 72 hours analyzing every financial transaction in Lewis and Cassandra's accounts. His report was damning. Clear evidence of financial fraud, forgery, and embezzlement of marital assets. More than enough for criminal charges. Lewis also spoke to Kara's teachers, her pediatrician, her neighbors. The story that emerged broke his heart. Kara had been showing signs of neglect for months, coming to school in dirty clothes, missing assignments, appearing hungry. Her teacher, Kay Gonzalez, had called the house multiple times, always getting voicemail. Almost called CPS 2 months ago, Kay admitted, guilt written across her face. But Kara begged me not to. She said her mom was just tired, that everything was fine. I should have called anyway. This isn't your fault, Lewis told her. It's Cassandra's. Only Cassandra's. The day before the custody hearing, Lewis sat with Kara in her hospital room. She was being discharged tomorrow, going to stay with Lewis at Nelson's apartment until the custody situation was resolved. Daddy? Why did Mommy leave me there? Lewis had prepared for this question. He consulted with Kara's therapist, Dr. Elena Booker, about how to answer honestly without causing more damage. Your mom made some very bad choices, sweetheart. She was spending time with someone else, and she forgot what was really important. You. That's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Is she going to jail? Maybe. Would that make you sad? Kara thought about it, her 9-year-old brain processing complex emotions. I don't think so. She was mean before you left. She yelled a lot. She said I was in the way. Lewis's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. You're not in the way. You're the most important thing in my entire life. And I'm going to make sure you're safe. Always. Promise. I promise. That night, Lewis reviewed his strategy with Stewart and Nelson. Everything was in place. The evidence was overwhelming. Cassandra's public sympathy campaign had backfired when her spending records leaked to the press. Suddenly, she wasn't a struggling mother, but a materialistic socialite who'd abandoned her daughter for a boyfriend. We're going to win this, Stewart said confidently. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. But Lewis knew the real battle hadn't even started yet. Because tomorrow, Cassandra would be in that courtroom, and he'd have to face her for the first time since the phone call. And when he did, he needed to stay calm, stay smart, stay 3 steps ahead. Because winning custody was only the first part of his plan. The second part was making sure Cassandra lost everything else. Chapter 4. The Testimony. The Suffolk County Family Court was a study in institutional beige, neutral walls, neutral carpet, designed to strip emotion from what were often the most emotional proceedings imaginable. Lewis sat at the plaintiff's table, Stewart beside him, wearing a press suit that made him look exactly like what he was, a competent professional, a good father, someone the system should trust. Across the aisle, Cassandra had transformed herself into a completely different person. Gone was the glamorous woman from the social media photos. Today she wore a modest gray dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled into a conservative bun. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of devastated mother to perfection. Next to her, Ronald Vaughn looked like he'd been cast from Central Lawyer Headquarters. Silver hair, expensive suit, practiced expression of grave concern. Judge Armando Rowe entered, and the bailiff called court to order. This is an emergency custody hearing in the matter of Knight versus Knight. Judge Rowe began. Mr. Moss, you filed for sole custody with supervised visitation. Mrs. Knight, you're opposing. Let's begin with opening statements. Stewart stood. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of child endangerment and abandonment. Mrs. Knight left her 9-year-old daughter at school and didn't return for 30 hours. The child was found unconscious in an abandoned building, suffering from severe dehydration and hypothermia. During that time, Mrs. Knight was at a casino with her boyfriend, spending marital funds while her daughter fought for her life. We have evidence of systematic neglect, financial fraud, and deliberate endangerment. Mr. Knight is requesting full custody to protect his daughter from further harm. Vaughn stood next, his voice dripping with practiced empathy. Your Honor, this is a tragedy born of mental illness, not malice. Mrs. Knight has suffered from severe postpartum depression for years, exacerbated by her husband's prolonged absences. 6 months at sea, Your Honor. 6 months where a young mother is left alone with no support, no help, slowly drowning in depression and anxiety. On the day in question, Mrs. Knight experienced a dissociative episode, a complete break from reality. She's since been diagnosed by Dr. Phyllis Conrad, a leading psychiatrist, and has begun intensive treatment. She loves her daughter and made a terrible mistake while in the grip of mental illness. Punishing her with complete loss of custody would be cruel and counterproductive. Lewis kept his face neutral, but his hands curled into fists below the table. Judge Rowe nodded. Mr. Moss, call your first witness. The Commonwealth calls Detective Hugo McNeil. Hugo took the stand, was sworn in, and Stewart led him through the discovery of Kara, the abandoned warehouse, the condition she was found in, the timeline of Cassandra's whereabouts. Detective, what did you discover about Mrs. Knight's activities during the 30 hours her daughter was missing? Hugo consulted his notes. Credit card records show she was at the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut. Multiple charges, slot machines, restaurants, hotel bar. She didn't return to Massachusetts until approximately 11 p.m. on Tuesday, 3 hours after her daughter was discovered. Did she attempt to contact her daughter during this time? No phone records of any outgoing calls to the school, to friends, or to emergency services. She made several calls to Tony O'Neill. And when you finally reached Mrs. Knight, what was her response? She claimed she'd lost track of time. She said she thought her husband was handling pickup from school. Was Mr. Knight in the country? No, he was 200 miles offshore in the North Atlantic. Stewart nodded. No further questions. Vaughn stood for cross-examination. Detective McNeil, in your experience, can mental illness cause people to lose track of time? Objection, Stewart said. The detective isn't a medical expert. Sustained. Vaughn pivoted smoothly. Detective, did you find any evidence that Mrs. Knight intentionally harmed her daughter? Hugo's jaw tightened. The abandonment itself caused harm. But did you find evidence of intent to cause that specific harm? A plan, written communications indicating she wanted her daughter hurt. Not explicitly, but thank you, Detective. The next witness was Kay Gonzalez, Kara's teacher. She testified about the signs of neglect, the dirty clothes, the missed parent-teacher conferences, the decline in Kara's grades and social engagement. When Kara didn't get picked up from school, what did you do? Stewart asked. I called the emergency contacts. Mrs. Knight's phone went to voicemail. I couldn't reach Mr. Knight because he was at sea. I waited an hour, then called our principal. We tried to find Kara, but she'd left the school grounds. A 9-year-old walked away from school alone, and no one noticed for an hour? We have 300 students. It was chaos during dismissal. By the time we realized, Kay's voice broke. I should have called the police immediately. This isn't your fault, Ms. Gonzalez. You did everything right. Mrs. Knight was the parent. She was responsible. During cross-examination, Vaughn asked, Ms. Gonzalez, did Kara ever mention her mother being depressed or acting strangely? Kay hesitated. She said her mom was tired a lot. Tired? A symptom of depression, isn't it? I suppose. Did Kara seem scared of her mother? Not scared exactly, but she was quiet about her home life. Vaughn nodded as if this proved his point. A mother struggling with mental illness, too ashamed to ask for help. Tragic. Then came the forensic accountant, Alexander Garrison. He laid out the financial evidence with clinical precision. The forged documents, the hidden accounts, the systematic draining of marital assets. Mr. Garrison, Stewart asked, in your expert opinion, does this financial pattern suggest mental illness or deliberate fraud? Deliberate fraud. The timing, the amounts chosen to avoid reporting thresholds, the creation of separate accounts. These are conscious decisions made by someone avoiding detection. Could someone in a dissociative state do this? Not in my experience. This requires planning, sustained attention, and awareness of legal consequences. Vaughn's cross was aggressive. Mr. Garrison, are you a psychiatrist? No. Then you can't actually diagnose mental illness, can you? I can recognize patterns of criminal behavior. That's not what I asked. The battle went back and forth for hours. Then Stewart called Lewis to the stand. Mr. Knight, tell us about your relationship with your daughter. Lewis relaxed slightly. This he could do. Kara is everything to me. I know my job takes me away for months at a time, but I call her every night I have satellite access. We video chat when possible. I text her pictures of where I am, what I'm seeing. When I'm home, we're inseparable. And your relationship with your wife? I thought we had a partnership. I worked to provide financial stability. She managed the home and cared for Kara. I trusted her completely. When did you first suspect something was wrong? Lewis described the phone call, the moment Cassandra said I forgot, the sound of music and laughter in the background. His voice never wavered. He presented facts, timelines, evidence of his own attempts to stay connected despite the distance. Mr. Knight, if you're granted custody, what's your plan for Kara's care? I've resigned from maritime work. I've accepted a position with a local engineering firm. 9 to 5, no travel. I'll be there for Kara every day. She'll have stability, therapy, everything she needs to recover. You're giving up a $700,000 salary. Without hesitation, Kara is worth more than any amount of money. Vaughn's cross-examination was designed to paint Lewis as controlling and absent. Mr. Knight, you spent 6 months at a time away from your family. Isn't that abandonment too? I was working to support them, and I maintained constant contact. Constant? Phone calls every few days. Every day when possible. Satellite communication is limited, but you weren't physically present. You weren't there for parent-teacher conferences, for illnesses, for the daily struggles of raising a child. Lewis met his eyes steadily. No, I wasn't. I trusted my wife to handle those things. That trust was misplaced. Or perhaps your absence contributed to her mental decline? My absence didn't make her steal money and spend it on her boyfriend. My absence didn't make her leave our daughter to die. Objection. Vaughn snapped. Inflammatory. Sustained. Mr. Knight, please answer only the questions asked. But the damage was done. The jury of the court, Judge Rowe, had seen Lewis's controlled anger, his clear mind, his absolute commitment to his daughter. Then Cassandra took the stand, and the performance began. She cried beautifully, explaining how the loneliness had crushed her, how she'd spiraled into depression, how Tony O'Neill had been a friend who became something more during her darkest times. I never meant to hurt Kara, she sobbed. I love her so much. That day I broke. I couldn't think straight. I know it sounds impossible, but I genuinely forgot. My mind just erased it. Vaughn led her gently through her diagnosis, her new medication regimen, her commitment to therapy. Then Stewart stood for cross-examination, and Lewis leaned forward. Mrs. Knight, you testified that you experienced a dissociative episode. Is that correct? Yes. During this episode, you forgot your daughter existed? I didn't forget she existed. The time slipped away. Stewart pulled out a document. I have a credit card statement from that day. You made purchases at 2:15 p.m., 4:47 p.m., 6:33 p.m., and 9:12 p.m. You signed receipts. You interacted with dealers at the casino, with waitstaff, with hotel employees. You appeared normal to all of them. I was on autopilot. You were functional enough to gamble, to drink, to socialize, but not functional enough to remember your daughter. It's hard to explain. Let me make it easier. You didn't forget Kara. You chose to ignore her. You chose Tony O'Neill over your daughter. No. Stewart played the surveillance video from the cafe, the one where Cassandra and Tony discussed sending Kara to boarding school. The courtroom went silent as Cassandra's own voice echoed. She's going to be a problem. Kids always are. Judge Rowe's expression hardened. That was taken out of context, Cassandra said desperately. We were just talking hypothetically. You called your daughter a problem 3 weeks before you abandoned her. Cassandra's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the evidence was there. The video, the financial records, the timeline of deliberate neglect. When court adjourned for the day, Lewis knew they'd won. But he also knew Cassandra would have one more card to play, and he was ready for it. Chapter 5, The Depths. That evening, Lewis returned to Nelson's apartment where Kara was staying under the supervision of a court-appointed guardian. She ran to him, and he scooped her up, holding her tight. How's my brave girl? Tired, but okay. Did you win? Not yet, but we will. After Kara went to bed, Lewis, Stewart, and Nelson gathered around the kitchen table. Judge Rowe's leaning our way, Stewart said. The surveillance video destroyed Cassandra's credibility. But Vaughn's going to push the mental illness angle hard tomorrow. He'll bring in Dr. Conrad, and she'll testify that everything Cassandra did is consistent with severe depression and dissociation. Can we counter it? We have our own psychiatric expert, Dr. Elena Booker, who's been working with Kara. She'll testify that Cassandra's behavior shows personality disorder traits, narcissism, and antisocial patterns, not depression. Nelson pulled out his laptop. There's something else you need to see. My team's been digging into Tony O'Neill's background. He's done this before. The screen showed police reports from 2 previous relationships. In both cases, O'Neill had courted married women, encouraged them to leave their husbands, helped them hide assets, then disappeared once the money was gone. He's a professional predator, Nelson said, and he's grooming Cassandra to take the fall while he walks away clean. Lewis studied the reports. She doesn't know, does she? Doubt it. She thinks they're in love. Can we use this? Stewart considered. It establishes pattern of behavior. Shows this wasn't a one-time mental breakdown, but a calculated relationship. Yeah, I can use it. The next morning, Dr. Phyllis Conrad took the stand for the defense. She was impressive. Credentials from Johns Hopkins, 20 years of experience, published research on postpartum depression. Dr. Conrad, Vaughn asked, in your professional opinion, is Mrs. Knight's behavior consistent with severe postpartum depression and dissociative episodes? Absolutely. The isolation, the feelings of being overwhelmed, the gradual detachment from reality. These are textbook symptoms. When combined with the stress of single parenting for months at a time, a complete dissociative break is not only possible, but predictable. Could this condition cause her to forget her child? In severe cases, yes. The mind essentially shuts down non-critical functions to protect itself. It's a survival mechanism. Stewart's cross-examination was surgical. Dr. Conrad, you've examined Mrs. Knight twice for a total of 4 hours. Is that correct? Yes. And these examinations occurred after the abandonment, after Mrs. Knight was facing criminal charges? That's when she sought treatment, or when her lawyer told her she needed a diagnosis to avoid prison? Objection. Sustained. Stewart shifted gears. Dr. Conrad, is it possible for someone to fake the symptoms of dissociation? Possible, but is it possible for someone to claim mental illness as a defense strategy? I suppose, but your training didn't include access to Mrs. Knight's financial records, her surveillance footage, her text messages with Tony O'Neill. You based your diagnosis purely on her self-reported symptoms, didn't you? Dr. Conrad's confidence wavered. That's standard practice. Even when the patient has a clear motive to lie. The objections came fast, but Stewart had made his point. Then he called Dr. Elena Booker. Elena was younger than Dr. Conrad, but no less credible. She'd been working with Kara for 2 weeks, and her testimony was devastating. I've reviewed Kara's case extensively. The pattern of neglect goes back months, well before any alleged dissociative episode. Kara describes her mother as increasingly angry, resentful, and absent. She reports being told she was in the way and a burden. This isn't depression. This is a personality disorder characterized by lack of empathy and narcissistic traits. Can you explain the difference? Stewart asked. Depression makes people feel terrible about themselves. Personality disorders make people feel terrible about everyone else. Mrs. Knight wasn't sad about abandoning Kara. She was annoyed Kara existed in the first place. Vaughn tried to discredit Elena, but she held firm. Then Stewart dropped his bombshell. Your Honor, I'd like to call Anthony O'Neill to the stand. Cassandra's face went white. Tony, sitting in the back of the courtroom, looked like he wanted to bolt. The bailiff brought him forward, and Stewart began with simple questions. How he met Cassandra, the nature of their relationship. Mr. O'Neill, how long have you been seeing Mrs. Knight? About 11 months. And you knew she was married? Yes. Did you know she had a daughter? Yes. Did you encourage Mrs. Knight to spend time with you instead of caring for her daughter? Tony squirmed. I didn't encourage anything. We're adults. She made her own choices. Stewart pulled out the cafe surveillance video again, played it for the court. Tony's voice. She's going to be a problem. Kids always are. That sounds like encouragement to me, Mr. O'Neill. I was just venting. You were manipulating a married woman to abandon her child, so you'd have unrestricted access to her money. Stewart presented the financial records showing cash transfers from Cassandra to Tony. $63,000 over 8 months. What was that for? Loans. Investments. Investments in what? Various business opportunities. Name one. Tony couldn't, because there were no investments. Just a con artist bleeding his mark dry. Stewart turned to Cassandra. Mrs. Knight, did you know Mr. O'Neill has 2 previous relationships with married women that followed the exact same pattern? Cassandra's shock looked genuine. What? Stewart presented the police reports. Tony had done this before. The same playbook. Romance. Encouragement to hide assets. Eventual abandonment once the money dried up. Cassandra turned to look at Tony, betrayal written across her face. And Lewis, watching from the plaintiff's table, felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a cold, clinical awareness that his plan was working. Judge Rowe called a recess. During the break, Lewis watched Cassandra and Tony argue in the hallway, their voices rising. Security had to intervene. When court resumed, Judge Rowe looked tired. I've heard enough. This case presents a clear situation of child endangerment and systematic neglect. While I'm sympathetic to mental health struggles, the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate behavior, not isolated incident. Mrs. Knight chose her relationship over her daughter repeatedly. The abandonment was the culmination of months of neglect, not a sudden break from reality. Cassandra started crying again, but this time it looked real. The performance was over. I'm granting sole physical and legal custody to Mr. Lewis Knight. Mrs. Knight will have supervised visitation only, pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. Additionally, I'm ordering a full forensic audit of all marital assets and recommending the district attorney pursue charges of child endangerment, fraud, and forgery. The gavel fell. Lewis had won, but as he walked out of the courtroom, Kara's hand in his, he knew this was just the beginning. The custody battle was over. The criminal trial would be harder, and he had one more piece to put in place, ensuring Tony O'Neill paid for his role in destroying his family. That night, Lewis received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Knight, this is Detective Calvin Glover, Fraud Division. I understand you have information about Tony O'Neill. Lewis smiled. Yes, Detective. I have quite a lot of information. What would you like to meet? Chapter 6, The Trap. Tony O'Neill was many things. A con artist, a manipulator, a coward, but he wasn't entirely stupid, which made him dangerous in a cornered animal kind of way. Lewis knew this. So when he met Detective Glover at a coffee shop in Cambridge, he came prepared with not just evidence, but a strategy. O'Neill's been running this scam for years, Lewis explained, spreading documents across the table. He targets married women with assets, befriends them, romances them, convinces them their husbands are the problem. Once he has access to their finances, he bleeds them dry through business investments that never materialize. Glover studied the pattern. We've had our eye on him before, but the victims never press charges. They're too embarrassed. Cassandra will press charges. You sure about that? For what I saw in court, she's still defending him. She was, until she saw the police reports from his previous marks. I made sure my lawyer presented them publicly. Now she knows she's just another victim in a long line. That's cold, Mr. Knight. So, is leaving a 9-year-old to die in a warehouse. Glover nodded slowly. What do you need from me? I need you to build a case against O'Neill that's ironclad. Wire fraud, financial exploitation, possibly conspiracy to commit child endangerment. I'll provide every record, every surveillance video, every piece of evidence. But I need you to move fast before he runs. He's a flight risk. His last 2 victims? He disappeared the moment things got complicated. He's already liquidating assets. Nelson had confirmed it. O'Neill had sold his car, emptied his apartment with drawn cash. He was getting ready to ghost. I can get a warrant, Glover said. Maybe freeze his accounts. Do it today. While Glover worked the legal angle, Lewis played a riskier card. He called Cassandra. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice hoarse from crying. What do you want? To offer you a choice. I have nothing to say to you. Then listen. Tony O'Neill has done this to at least 2 other women. He found them, manipulated them, stole their money, and disappeared. You're not special to him, Cassandra. You're a mark. Silence. I don't believe you. Then call him. Ask him where the $63,000 went. Ask him about the business investments. Ask him why he's liquidating his assets. More silence. He loves me. He loves your access to my money. The second you're convicted and lose that access, he's gone. You'll be in prison, and he'll be in Florida or Nevada finding his next victim. Why do you care? You got what you wanted. You got Kara. Lewis kept his voice level. I care because I want him to pay for what he did to my daughter. And you're the only one who can make that happen. How? Testify against him. Full cooperation with the fraud investigation. In exchange, I'll recommend leniency at your sentencing hearing. You'd help me. I'd help Kara have a mother who's not in prison for 10 years. She's been through enough. It was partially true. Lewis did want Kara to have some relationship with her mother, eventually, after years of therapy and genuine remorse. But more than that, he wanted Tony O'Neill to face consequences. I need to think about it. You have 24 hours. After that, O'Neill will be gone, and you'll take the fall alone. Lewis hung up before she could respond. The next move came from an unexpected direction. Kay Gonzalez, Kara's teacher, contacted Lewis with information she'd been reluctant to share during the custody trial. Mr. Knight, there's something I need to tell you. About 6 weeks before Kara was abandoned, another parent reported seeing Mrs. Knight with a man at a hotel in Newton. The parent didn't think much of it at the time, but in light of everything, do you have the parent's contact information? Yes. Her name is Heidi Glover. She's a lawyer, actually. She said if you need a statement, she's willing to provide one. Lewis met with Heidi at her office. She was sharp, professional, and clearly angry about what had happened to Kara. I saw them at the Four Seasons. Cassandra and a man I didn't recognize checking in midday. I remember because I was there for a work lunch, and it struck me as odd. Why would a local parent need a hotel room in the middle of the day? Would you be willing to testify to that? Absolutely. I've been following the case. What she did to that little girl. Heidi shook her head. I have kids. I can't imagine. Lewis added Heidi's statement to his growing file. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every documented instance of Cassandra's neglect and deception. But the real break came 30 hours after Lewis's call to Cassandra. She called back. I'll do it. I'll testify against Tony. What changed your mind? I went to his apartment. It's empty. He's gone. He didn't even say goodbye. Just vanished. Her voice broke. You were right. About all of it. Lewis felt no satisfaction. Only grim confirmation. I'll connect you with Detective Glover. He'll need a full statement. Lewis? I know I don't deserve to ask, but can I see Kara? Just for a few minutes? I need to tell her I'm sorry. That's up to Kara. He asked his daughter that evening, explaining carefully that her mother wanted to apologize. Kara, wise beyond her 9 years, thought about it. Will you stay with me? Every second. The meeting was supervised, held at Dr. Booker's office with the therapist present. Cassandra looked terrible. Unwashed hair, shadows under her eyes, the glossy veneer completely gone. Kara, I'm so sorry. I was a terrible mother. I let you down in the worst possible way. Kara didn't run to her, didn't cry. She just looked at her mother with those serious dark eyes and said, You forgot me. I did, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Tony was more important than me. Tony was a mistake. You're my daughter. You should have been my whole world. Should have been, but wasn't. The simple truth of it hung in the air. Cassandra started crying again, but Kara remained dry-eyed. I'm living with Daddy now. He resigned from his ship job to stay with me. That's what parents do. Lewis's throat tightened. He put his hand on Kara's shoulder. The visit lasted 15 minutes. When it was over, Kara turned to Lewis and said, Can we go home now? Home. Nelson's apartment had become home faster than their house in Newton ever had been. Yeah, sweetheart. We can go home. A week later, Tony O'Neill was arrested in Providence, Rhode Island, trying to board a bus to Miami. He'd been using a fake ID, carrying $47,000 in cash, and had already opened bank accounts under an assumed name. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable person, conspiracy to commit forgery, and thanks to Cassandra's testimony, conspiracy to commit child endangerment. Lewis watched the news coverage of the arrest with grim satisfaction. But he wasn't done yet. Because while the legal system would handle Tony and Cassandra, there was still one more person who needed to face consequences: Lewis himself. He'd been so focused on work, on providing financially, that he'd missed the signs of his family falling apart. He'd trusted blindly instead of verifying. He'd been absent when Kara needed him. That guilt would never fully disappear, but he could use it as motivation to be better. He started by selling the house in Newton. Too many bad memories. He bought a smaller place in Cambridge, closer to Kara's new school, walking distance to Dr. Booker's office. He established a routine. Breakfast together, walk to school, work, pickup, homework, dinner, reading time. Normal. Stable. What Kara had deserved all along. And slowly, over weeks and months, he saw his daughter begin to heal. The criminal trials were scheduled for 6 months out. Lewis knew they'd be difficult. Cassandra's lawyers would still try the mental illness defense. Tony's team would argue he was just a boyfriend caught up in someone else's mess. But Lewis had one final card to play. One last piece of evidence that would seal both of their fates. And he was saving it for exactly the right moment. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The criminal trial began on a cold morning in February, nearly 7 months after Kara had been found in that warehouse. She was healthier now. Her physical wounds had healed, and while the psychological scars remained, Dr. Booker reported significant progress. Lewis sat in the gallery as the prosecution laid out the case against Cassandra Knight. Child endangerment, fraud, forgery. The evidence was overwhelming. But Ronald Vaughn still fought. He brought back Dr. Conrad, who doubled down on the mental illness diagnosis. He brought in character witnesses who testified to Cassandra's kindness before her breakdown. He painted a picture of a woman destroyed by isolation and depression, not a calculating narcissist. And for a moment, Lewis worried it might work. The jury looked sympathetic. One woman in the front row was actually crying during Cassandra's testimony. Then the prosecution called Lewis to the stand. "Mr. Knight, how has your daughter's recovery been?" "Long, difficult. She has nightmares. Trust issues. She's in therapy twice a week. But she's getting better. And your relationship with her? Stronger than ever. I'm there for her now. Every day. Do you believe your wife's actions are the result of mental illness?" "Objection," Vaughn shouted. "He's not qualified." "I'll rephrase," the prosecutor said. "Mr. Knight, based on your knowledge of your wife over 7 years of marriage, did you ever see signs of mental illness before this incident?" Lewis thought carefully. "I saw selfishness. I saw someone who resented being a mother. I saw someone who prioritized her comfort over our daughter's needs. But I didn't see illness. I saw choice." During cross-examination, Vaughn tried to paint Lewis as a vindictive husband, but Lewis remained calm, factual, devastating. "You're angry at my client, aren't you?" "I'm angry at what she did to Kara. Angry enough to exaggerate, to lie. I don't need to lie. The evidence speaks for itself." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Tony O'Neill was tried separately, but his case was simpler. The fraud charges were ironclad, and Cassandra's testimony had destroyed his defense. But on the final day of Cassandra's trial, Lewis played his last card. He'd been saving something, a piece of evidence he'd kept from everyone: the prosecutors, Stewart, even Nelson. During a recess, he approached the lead prosecutor, a tough woman named Brenda Cooley who'd been skeptical of him at first, but had come to respect his methodical approach. "I have something you need to see." He showed her a video file, recovered from Cassandra's laptop by a forensic specialist Lewis had hired privately. The video was dated 2 days before Kara was abandoned. Cassandra, alone in her bedroom, talking to herself, or rather, talking to a camera like she was making a video diary. "I can't do this anymore. Every time I look at her, I see Lewis. I see the trap I'm in. Tony says we could have a real life together if it wasn't for Kara. He's right. She's always been the problem." A pause. Maybe if something happened. An accident. Lewis would be devastated, but he'd eventually move on. And I'd be free. Brenda's face went white. Jesus Christ. She was planning this. Not consciously, maybe, but the thought was there. This wasn't a dissociative episode. This was premeditation. Why didn't you give me this earlier? Because I needed to see if she'd show genuine remorse. If she'd take responsibility. She hasn't. Every statement, every testimony, it's been excuses and deflection. She doesn't feel bad about what she did. She feels bad she got caught. If I introduce this now, her lawyers will claim it's tampered with. I had it authenticated by 3 separate forensic experts. Chain of custody is documented. It's real. Brenda studied Lewis with new wariness. You've been planning this from the beginning, haven't you? Every move calculated. I told you on day 1. I was going to use the law. I was going to use evidence. And I was going to make sure she lost everything. When court resumed, Brenda requested to introduce new evidence. Vaughn objected strenuously, but the judge allowed it. The video played for the jury. The courtroom was silent except for Cassandra's recorded voice. Maybe if something happened. An accident. Lewis would be devastated, but he'd eventually move on. And I'd be free. Lewis watched the jury's faces change. His sympathy evaporated. The woman who'd been crying now looked disgusted. Cassandra sat frozen at the defense table, her face drained of color. Vaughn tried to salvage it, arguing the video showed mental illness, not intent. But the damage was done. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Lewis didn't attend. He'd already moved on to the next phase of his life, the one where he was just a father, not a warrior in a courtroom battle. But he did submit a victim impact statement, which the judge read during sentencing. Cassandra Knight had every opportunity to be a good mother. She had financial resources, a support system, and a daughter who loved her. She chose, repeatedly and consciously, to prioritize herself over her child. The result was nearly fatal. My daughter will carry the scars of that abandonment for the rest of her life. No sentence will undo that damage. But I hope the court will send a message that children are not inconveniences to be forgotten. They are human beings who deserve protection, even from their own parents. Cassandra received 8 years in prison for child endangerment, fraud, and forgery. With good behavior, she'd serve 6. Tony O'Neill got 12 years for fraud, financial exploitation, and conspiracy. No chance of parole for the first 7. Lewis heard the news at Kara's school, where he'd volunteered to help with the spring fair. He simply nodded, thanked the prosecutor who'd called to inform him, and went back to helping Kara paint a sign for the bake sale. Is it over? Kara asked quietly. Yeah, sweetheart. It's over. Good. I'm tired of being the girl whose mom forgot her. I want to just be Kara again. Lewis hugged her tight. You've always been just Kara. You've always been perfect. Chapter 8. The Surface. 6 months later, Lewis had settled into his new normal. His job with the local engineering firm was challenging but manageable. He worked from home 2 days a week, which gave him flexibility for Kara's appointments and school events. Kara was thriving. Her grades had improved dramatically. She made friends. The nightmares were less frequent. Dr. Booker reported she was processing the trauma in healthy ways. Lewis even started dating again, carefully, casually. Nothing serious. He wasn't ready for serious, and neither was Kara. But it was nice to remember he was more than just a father. He was a person, too. One evening, he received a letter from Cassandra. Prison letters had to be screened, but Dr. Booker suggested he read it before deciding whether to share it with Kara. The letter was different from her previous communications. No excuses. No self-pity. Lewis, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I finally understand what I did. Not just the abandonment, all of it. The years of resentment, the selfish choices, the way I treated Kara like an obligation instead of a gift. Therapy here is mandatory, and at first I fought it. I wanted to cling to the story I'd told myself, that I was a victim of circumstances, of mental illness, of your absences. But my therapist wouldn't let me hide. She made me face the truth. I chose this. Every step. I chose to pursue Tony. I chose to steal money. I chose to prioritize my wants over Kara's needs. And yes, I chose to leave her at school that day. Maybe I didn't consciously plan it, but some part of me wanted her to just disappear. That's the hardest truth to face. I didn't want to be a mother. I resented her existence because it limited my freedom. And that makes me a monster. I don't know if Kara will ever want to see me again. I understand if she doesn't. But if she does, someday, I want to be someone worth seeing. Someone who's actually done the work to change. I'm taking classes, working in the prison library, volunteering with a program that helps incarcerated mothers understand the impact of their absence on their children. It's brutal. Every story breaks my heart. And I think about Kara constantly. You were right to take her from me. You were right about everything. I'm sorry. It's not enough, but it's all I have. Cassandra. Lewis read the letter 3 times. He showed it to Dr. Booker, who analyzed it carefully. It reads as genuine, Elena said. But letters are easy. Consistent action over time is what matters. If she maintains this trajectory for years, maybe there's hope for eventual reconciliation. But Kara shouldn't feel any pressure. Lewis agreed. He filed the letter away and didn't mention it to Kara. Not yet. Maybe someday, when she was older and ready to decide for herself whether her mother deserved a second chance. For now, his focus was on building a life that felt stable and safe. He reconnected with old friends, started playing in a weekend basketball league, even got a dog, a golden retriever puppy that Kara named Anchor, which Lewis found both adorable and poignant. He also did something he'd been avoiding. He went back to the warehouse where Kara had been found. It was scheduled for demolition, and Lewis wanted to see it one last time. Not for closure. He didn't believe in closure. But for perspective. Nelson came with him. They stood in the dusty space where Kara had huddled, alone and terrified, for 30 hours. You did good, Nelson said quietly. You got justice. You got your daughter back. You didn't let it destroy you. I wanted to destroy her. But you didn't. You stayed smart. You stayed legal. You proved you were the better person. Lewis looked around the empty warehouse. She was 9 years old, Nelson. She thought her mother would come back. She waited in here, thinking any minute Cassandra would walk through that door. But you walked through it instead. You've been walking through doors for her ever since. That was true. Every morning, Lewis opened doors for Kara. Car doors, school doors, doors to new experiences and opportunities. He was teaching her that she could trust again, that not every adult would fail her. They left the warehouse and drove back to Cambridge, where Kara was at a sleepover with her new best friend, a girl named Melanie Travis who lived 2 blocks away. Lewis had vetted Melanie's parents thoroughly, perhaps too thoroughly, but they'd been understanding. They had kids too. They got it. That night, alone in his house for the first time in months, Lewis allowed himself to reflect on everything that had happened. He'd lost a marriage, but he'd never really had a partnership. He'd lost his maritime career, but he'd gained a present-tense relationship with his daughter. He'd been forced to rebuild his entire life, but the new structure was stronger than the old one. And Cassandra? She lost everything. Her freedom, her daughter, her reputation, her future. The woman who'd wanted to be free from responsibility now had nothing but time to think about her choices. Tony O'Neill had lost everything too. His freedom, his scams, his illusions of being clever. He was in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, far from the ocean he'd never sailed on, far from the women he'd manipulated. Justice, Lewis thought, wasn't always satisfying. It didn't undo damage or erase scars. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that what happened mattered. That Kara mattered. The next morning, he picked Kara up from her sleepover. She was chattering excitedly about the movies they'd watched, the pancakes they'd made, the elaborate plans she and Melanie had for their next adventure. Can we go to the aquarium next weekend? She asked. Absolutely. And can we bring Anchor? Service animals only, kiddo. Anchor is a service dog. He provides emotional support. Lewis laughed. Nice try. As they drove home, Kara suddenly got quiet. Dad, yeah. I'm happy. Lewis glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Yeah. I know everything that happened was bad. I still have bad days. But mostly, I'm just happy. Lewis's eyes stung, but he kept his voice steady. Me too, Kara. Me too. Chapter 9. The Horizon. 2 years after the trial, Lewis received a call from the prison. Cassandra had been granted early release due to good behavior and successful completion of multiple rehabilitation programs. She was asking for supervised visitation with Kara. Lewis discussed it with Dr. Booker, with Stuart, with Kara herself, who is 11 now and old enough to have opinions about her mother. I don't know if I want to see her, Kara said honestly. I'm not mad anymore, but I don't know what to say to her. You don't have to see her if you don't want to. This is entirely your choice. Kara thought about it for a week. Then, maybe once, to see if she's different. The visit was arranged at Dr. Booker's office, with Lewis and Elena both present. Cassandra looked different. Older, humbler, without the polished veneer Lewis remembered. She was working as a clerk at a legal aid office, living in a halfway house, attending AA meetings despite never having had a drinking problem, just because, she said, the structure helped. Hi, Kara. Hi. You've grown so much. It's been 2 years. I know. I wrote you letters. Your dad said you weren't ready to read them. That's okay. I read one, Kara said. The one where you said you were sorry. Did you believe me? Kara considered this with the seriousness of someone who'd learned that words and actions don't always align. I think you're sorry you got caught. Maybe you're sorry about the rest too. I don't know yet. Cassandra nodded, tears in her eyes. That's fair. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. Not for a judge or a parole board. For me. And for you, even if you never want to see me again. What's it like in prison? The question surprised everyone. Cassandra blinked. It's hard, but it gave me time to think, to realize how much I messed up, how much I hurt you. Do you have friends there? A few. Women who made mistakes like me. We help each other. Do you have a boyfriend? No. I'm not dating. I'm not ready for that. I need to figure out who I am without trying to be what someone else wants. Kara nodded. Dr. Booker says it called finding your authentic self. Dr. Booker sounds smart. She is. She helps me understand why people do bad things. She says sometimes people are hurt and they hurt others. Sometimes they're scared. Sometimes they just never learned how to be good. Which one do you think I am? Kara looked at her mother with those dark, serious eyes. I think you're all of them. The visit lasted 30 minutes. When it ended, Kara didn't hug Cassandra, but she did say, maybe I'll see you again. Maybe not. I need to think about it. That's all I can ask for. After Cassandra left, Dr. Booker asked Kara how she felt. Weird. She seemed sad. Like really sad, not pretend sad. Do you think people can change? Elena asked. I don't know. Can they? Some can. Some can't. Some change for a while and then go back. The question is whether you want to give her the chance. Kara looked at Lewis. What do you think, Dad? Lewis chose his words carefully. I think your mom made terrible choices that hurt you badly. I think she's paying for those choices and trying to be better. Whether that's enough is up to you. Whatever you decide, I support you. Even if I want to see her again, even then, as long as it's supervised, and as long as you feel safe. Kara decided to see Cassandra once a month. The visits were brief and sometimes awkward, but they were honest. Cassandra didn't try to buy Kara's affection or make excuses. She just showed up, answered questions, and listened. Lewis watched from the waiting room, and he saw something he hadn't expected, genuine change. Cassandra was quieter now, more thoughtful. She asked about Kara's life without making it about herself. She accepted boundaries without pushing. One evening, after a particularly good visit, Cassandra asked to speak with Lewis alone. Thank you, she said simply, for letting me see her, for not poisoning her against me. I told her the truth, what you did, why it was wrong, how it hurt her. But I also told her people are complex, that you weren't always bad. Wasn't I, though? Lewis considered. You were selfish, immature, narcissistic, but you loved her once. I remember when she was born, the way you looked at her. That was real. And then I buried it, under resentment and self-pity and stupid fantasies about being someone I wasn't. Yeah, I don't expect you to forgive me either. I don't know if I can, but I can accept that you're trying. That's something. Years passed. Kara grew into a teenager, smart, resilient, with a wicked sense of humor and a strong sense of justice. She played soccer, excelled in math, volunteered at an animal shelter. She continued seeing Cassandra, though the frequency varied. Sometimes monthly, sometimes not for 6 months. Their relationship would never be traditional mother-daughter, but it was something, a small, careful connection built on honesty rather than obligation. Lewis eventually did start dating seriously. A woman named Diana Hensley, the nurse from the hospital, who'd reached out years later to check on Kara. They took it slow, but it worked. Diana was kind, patient, and had no interest in replacing Kara's mother. She was just herself, which was enough. Tony O'Neill remained in prison. Lewis heard through Nelson that Tony had tried to con other inmates, gotten caught, and added time to his sentence. Some people never learned. On Kara's 16th birthday, Lewis took her to the ocean. They stood on the beach in Maine, watching the waves crash against the rocks. You know what's weird? Kara said, "I used to hate that you worked on ships. I thought it meant you didn't want to be with me. I always wanted to be with you. I know that now. But back then, when Mom was being Mom, I thought maybe you left because we weren't enough." Lewis turned to face her. "You were always enough. You were everything. I just didn't realize I was showing you by leaving. I thought providing was the same as protecting. I was wrong. You came back, though. When it mattered, you came back. And I'm never leaving again. Different kind of work now. Different priorities." Kara smiled. "Good. Because I need you here. Not just when I'm in danger, but for the regular stuff. The boring parent stuff. I love the boring parent stuff." Liar. They both laughed. As the sun set over the Atlantic, Lewis thought about the phone call that had changed everything. The moment he'd heard your daughter was found unconscious and felt his world collapse. He thought about the rage, the planning, the methodical dismantling of Cassandra's life. He thought about justice and revenge and the blurry line between them. But mostly, he thought about the girl standing beside him, no longer 9 years old and broken, but 16 and whole. Still healing, still growing, but fundamentally okay. "Dad, yeah, I'm going to be fine. You know that, right?" "I do. Good. Because you worry too much. That's my job. Your job is to trust me. I'm strong. You made me strong." Lewis pulled her into a hug. "You made yourself strong, kiddo. I just gave you the space to do it." They watched the ocean together as the sky turned purple and gold. Somewhere out there, 200 miles from land, cargo ships moved across the water, carrying goods and sailors and stories of their own. But Lewis Knight was home now, and he was staying. The deep had tested him. The deep ocean of isolation, the deep waters of rage, the deep pain of almost losing his daughter. But he'd surfaced. They both had. And the horizon ahead looked bright. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Lie. Staff Sergeant Marshall Wyatt crouched behind concrete barriers in the dusty outskirts of Kandahar, sweat dripping down his face despite the cool March evening. 3 tours in Afghanistan had hardened him into something most people back home wouldn't recognize. A calculating predator who'd learned that mercy was a luxury that got good men killed. His phone buzzed against his chest. A text from Jessica Clay, his fiancée of 2 years. His heart actually warmed seeing her name. One of the few emotions he still allowed himself to feel in this hellscape. "Missing you so much, baby. Can't wait for the wedding next month. The baby is getting bigger every day. I love you both so much." Marshall smiled, one of his rare, genuine expressions. Jessica was 4 months pregnant with their first child, and the wedding was scheduled for his return. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, maybe, but Marshall had learned to accept the good when it came. 2 hours later, as he cleaned his rifle in the armory, another text came through. This one made his blood freeze. He fell for it. He thinks the baby is his. We'll take his house and his savings after the wedding. That fool will be paying child support for another man's kid. Marshall stared at the screen for a full minute, his mind processing what he'd just read. Then came the immediate follow-up. OMG, wrong person. Delete that. It was meant for MOM. Marshall, please ignore that text. My phone is glitching. Baby, please call me. Marshall's hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. Years of combat had burned that weakness out of him. But something cold and ancient settled in his chest, something that had kept him alive through hell and would serve him well now. He set the phone aside and finished cleaning his weapon with methodical precision. Jessica Clay had just made the worst mistake of her pathetic life. She'd awakened something that had been sleeping, something that enemies of America had learned to fear. But Marshall Wyatt was patient. He'd been hunting human predators for years, and he knew the most important rule: never strike when you're angry. Strike when you're ready. Chapter 2: The Gathering Storm. Marshall spent the next week conducting reconnaissance, just as he would on any mission. He made one call, not to Jessica, but to his old Army buddy Doug Emery, who now worked private security in Chicago. Doug, I need a favor. Deep background check. Everything you can find. Jessica Clay, age 26, lives in Millbrook Heights. Also Troy Warner, age 28, same area. Financial records, employment history, medical records if you can get them. And I need it fast. Jesus. Marshall, that's your girl, isn't it? What's going on? Just do it, Doug. And keep it quiet. Doug's voice turned serious. He'd served 2 tours with Marshall and knew that tone. You got it, brother. Give me 72 hours. Marshall maintained normal contact with Jessica during this time, responding to her increasingly frantic texts with short, reassuring messages. She was clearly panicked about the accidental text, trying to gauge if he believed her phone glitch story. Can't wait to see you and meet our baby, he texted back, each word calculated to keep her calm and unsuspecting. Meanwhile, Marshall used his military connections to request emergency leave. The false compassionate leave request was approved within hours. One advantage of being a decorated soldier with 3 tours and a spotless record. Doug's report arrived exactly 72 hours later, and it painted a picture that made Marshall's jaw clench. Jessica Clay had been in a relationship with Troy Warner for over 2 years, longer than she'd been with Marshall. Warner was a local real estate agent, married with 2 kids of his own, with a history of financial troubles and gambling debts. The most damaging piece: medical records showed Jessica had conceived during a period when Marshall was deployed, making it impossible for him to be the father. But there was more. Doug had dug deeper, uncovering a pattern. Jessica had been researching military benefits, survivor benefits, and divorce laws in their state. She'd even consulted with a divorce attorney 3 months ago, while telling Marshall how excited she was about their future together. Marshall sat in his bunk that night, staring at the evidence of Jessica's betrayal. Around him, other soldiers slept, some muttering in their dreams about firefights and IEDs. But Marshall was dreaming of something else entirely. He pulled out a notebook and began to write. Plans. Contingencies. A detailed operation that would destroy Jessica Clay and Troy Warner so completely that they'd beg for the mercy he had no intention of giving. The next morning, Marshall boarded a transport plane back to the States. As the aircraft lifted off, he looked out at the Afghan mountains one last time. He learned to hunt in those mountains. Now he was bringing those skills home. Chapter 3: Homecoming Preparations. Marshall landed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, after a grueling 18-hour journey. Instead of heading straight home to Illinois, he made a detour to visit his older brother, Preston Wyatt, who ran a small construction company in Nashville. Preston took one look at Marshall's face and poured 2 whiskeys without being asked. You look like you're about to start a war, little brother. Something like that. Marshall laid out the entire situation, watching Preston's expression darken with each detail. Preston had always been protective of Marshall, especially after their parents died in a car accident when Marshall was 18. He'd been the one to encourage Marshall to join the Army, knowing his brother needed structure and purpose after their loss. What do you need? Preston asked without hesitation. Equipment, surveillance gear, and I need you to buy a property for me. Cash transaction, your name on the deed. Rural area, isolated. Big enough for privacy. Preston nodded grimly. I know just the place. Old farmhouse about an hour outside Nashville. Owner died last year. Family wants to sell quick. What else? Marshall pulled out a detailed list he'd written on the plane. Untraceable phones. Vehicle with clean plates. And I need you to spread word through your contractor network. You're looking for 2 people for a big job. High pay, out of state, requires relocating for 6 months. You're going to make them disappear. It wasn't a question. Preston knew his brother well enough to recognize when Marshall had moved beyond anger into something far more dangerous. They destroyed my life before I even knew there was a war, Marshall said quietly. They made me love a lie, made me dream about a future that never existed. They turned me into a fool. You're not a fool, Marshall. You're just not a sociopath like them. I am now. Preston studied his brother's face. The same features they'd shared since childhood, but something behind the eyes had changed. The Marshall who'd left for Afghanistan still had traces of the boy Preston remembered. This Marshall was something else entirely. All right, Preston said finally. But we do this smart. No half measures, no loose ends. If we're going to war, we're going to win. They spent the next 2 days planning. Preston purchased the farmhouse, a 40-acre property with a main house, several outbuildings, and complete isolation. He also acquired the requested equipment through various channels, including some items that weren't exactly legal for civilian use. Marshall, meanwhile, began the delicate process of psychological manipulation. He called Jessica, telling her he'd managed to get emergency leave and would be home in 3 days for a surprise visit before shipping out again. Jessica's relief was audible through the phone. "Oh, thank God, baby. I was so worried about that stupid text. I was going to explain everything when you got home." "Explain what?" Marshall asked innocently. "Nothing. I mean the phone thing. It was just, you know how technology is." "I do know," Marshall said, and there was something in his voice that made Jessica pause. "Marshall, are you okay? You sound different. Just tired, sweetheart. Combat changes a man. But don't worry. I'm still the same Marshall you fell in love with." After he hung up, Marshall stared at the phone for a long moment. In a way, he was telling the truth. He was still the same man she'd fallen in love with. The problem was, Jessica Clay had never really known who that man was. She was about to find out. Chapter 4. The Wedding March. Marshall arrived home on a Thursday afternoon, exactly as he'd promised. He drove a rental car to the modest house he'd purchased for Jessica 2 years ago, the house she was planning to steal from him after their wedding. Jessica was waiting on the porch, radiant in a yellow sundress that accentuated her pregnancy. For a moment, seeing her there, Marshall felt an echo of the love he'd once carried. Then he remembered the text, and that echo died. "Welcome home, soldier," she said, rushing into his arms. Marshall held her, noting how she trembled slightly. Fear or excitement? Probably both. He kissed her gently, tasting the lies on her lips. "How's our baby?" he asked, placing his hand on her belly. Jessica's smile faltered for just an instant. "Growing strong. The doctor says everything's perfect. I can't wait to meet him." Just a feeling." Marshall smiled. A father knows these things. That evening, Jessica's mother, Barbara Rogers, joined them for dinner. Barbara was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd never quite approved of Marshall, though she'd hidden it well. Now, with her daughter's windfall approaching, she was almost giddy. "So Marshall, dear," Barbara said over dessert, "Jessica tells me you're thinking of buying a bigger house after the wedding. Somewhere with more room for the baby." "Actually, I've been reconsidering that," Marshall said carefully. "Military pay doesn't go as far as it used to. We might need to scale back our plans." He watched both women tense. Jessica recovered first. "But sweetheart, we've already made so many plans. The nursery, the wedding, everything." "Plans change," Marshall said mildly. "In Afghanistan, you learn to adapt to circumstances beyond your control." Barbara's fork clinked against her plate. "Surely you're not suggesting canceling the wedding?" "Of course not. But maybe something smaller. More intimate. Just close family." Marshall could see the panic building in Jessica's eyes. A smaller wedding meant fewer witnesses, less legitimacy, potentially complicating their legal claim to his assets. "Marshall," Jessica said carefully, "is this about that text? Because I swear to you." "What text?" Barbara interrupted too quickly. Jessica shot her mother a warning look, but Marshall caught it. Another piece of evidence for his growing case file. "Jessica's phone malfunctioned while I was overseas," Marshall explained to Barbara. "Sent some gibberish to me instead of you. Technology, right?" Barbara relaxed visibly. Oh yes, these phones today. So complicated. After dinner, Marshall and Jessica sat on their porch swing, her head on his shoulder as they watched the sun set. It was peaceful, domestic, everything Marshall had dreamed of during his deployment. I love you, Jessica whispered. I know things have been stressful with the deployment and the wedding planning, but I love you so much. I love you too, Marshall replied, and part of him meant it. He loved the woman he'd thought she was. But that woman had never existed. Marshall, there's something I need to tell you. Jessica's voice was soft, uncertain. Marshall's muscles tensed. Was she going to confess? What is it, sweetheart? I've been seeing a therapist. About anxiety. The pregnancy, your deployment, everything has been so overwhelming. Another lie. Marshall had seen her therapy bills in Doug's report. Sessions that started long before her pregnancy. Around the same time, she'd begun planning her deception. That's good, he said. Taking care of your mental health is important. For you and the baby. Jessica relaxed against him. I was worried you'd think I was weak. I could never think that. Marshall stroked her hair gently. You're the strongest woman I know. As they sat in the gathering darkness, Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Preston. Package delivered to the farm. Everything's ready when you are. Marshall deleted the message and squeezed Jessica closer. You know what? He said. You're right about the wedding. Let's do it exactly as planned. Big celebration, all our friends and family. I want everyone to see how happy we are. Jessica's relief was palpable. Really? Oh, Marshall, I'm so glad. It's going to be perfect. Yes, Marshall agreed, staring into the darkness beyond their porch. It's going to be perfect. Chapter 5. The Dance of Deception. The next morning, Marshall suggested they meet with Troy Warner to discuss wedding venues. I heard he has connections in the real estate business, Marshall said casually. Maybe he knows some good locations. Jessica's face went pale. Troy Warner? I don't really know him that well. Really? That's strange. Doug Emery mentioned seeing you two together several times when he was in town last month. Marshall watched Jessica's mind race, trying to calculate how much he might know. Oh yes, we've met a few times. Real estate stuff, you know, for the house. Of course. Well, since we're looking at venues anyway, why not get his professional opinion? Jessica had no choice but to agree. An hour later, they sat in Troy Warner's office, a sleek space in Millbrook Heights Business District. Troy was a handsome man in his late 20s, with the easy charm of a successful salesman. When he saw Marshall, his confidence visibly wavered. Mr. Wyatt, Troy said, extending his hand. Jessica's told me so much about you. Thank you for your service. Marshall shook his hand, applying just enough pressure to make Troy wince. She's told me about you too. All good things. They discussed venue options for 20 minutes, Troy gradually relaxing as the conversation remained professional. Marshall played the role of eager groom perfectly, asking about capacity, catering options, photography setups. There's one place that might be perfect, Troy said, warming to his subject. The old Hartfield estate, about an hour outside town. It's been on the market for months, and the owner might be willing to rent it for events. Beautiful grounds, complete privacy. Privacy sounds perfect, Marshall said. Mind if we take a look? Troy glanced at Jessica, who nodded reluctantly. Sure, I could show you this afternoon. An hour later, they were driving through rolling countryside toward the Hartfield estate. Marshall rode in Troy's BMW, while Jessica followed in her car, claiming she needed to run errands afterward. The estate was impressive, a Victorian mansion on 50 acres, surrounded by woods and completely isolated. Troy led them through the main house, pointing out features that would work well for a wedding reception. The ballroom can hold 200 guests, Troy explained, leading them into a grand space with crystal chandeliers. And the grounds are perfect for an outdoor ceremony. Marshall nodded appreciatively while mentally cataloging the property's isolation, the multiple buildings, the various ways someone could disappear here without a trace. This is perfect, he told Troy. But I have to ask, how do you know so much about this place? You seem very familiar with it. Troy's smile flickered. I've shown it to several clients. It's been hard to sell because of the location. Remote properties can be challenging, Marshall agreed. But sometimes isolation is exactly what you need. Something in Marshall's tone made Troy look at him more carefully. Mr. Wyatt, if you don't mind me asking, what did you do in the Army? Special Forces, reconnaissance, and elimination. Elimination of targets. Marshall's smile was cold. I'm very good at finding people who don't want to be found and dealing with them permanently. Troy's face had gone pale. I see. The thing about hunting, Marshall continued conversationally, is that patience is everything. You have to study your prey, understand their habits, their weaknesses. You have to know them better than they know themselves. That's interesting. For instance, Marshall said, moving closer to Troy, a smart hunter always knows when he's being lied to. Animals lie through their behavior. False confidence, misdirection, panic masquerading as calm. Humans lie the same way. Troy was sweating now, despite the cool air in the mansion. I'm not sure I follow. I think you do. Marshall's voice was quiet, almost gentle. I think you follow perfectly. Before Troy could respond, Jessica appeared in the doorway. How's the tour going? Wonderfully, Marshall said, not taking his eyes off Troy. I was just telling Troy about my work in Afghanistan, how I hunted down enemies who thought they were safe. Jessica's voice was strained. That's nice, honey. Are we almost done here? Almost. Marshall finally looked away from Troy, whose relief was visible. Troy, would you mind giving us a moment alone? I'd like to discuss this with my fiancée privately. Troy nodded quickly and stepped outside. As soon as he was gone, Jessica grabbed Marshall's arm. What was that about? You were scaring him. Was I? I was just being friendly. Marshall studied Jessica's face. You seem nervous too. Is there something I should know about Troy? No, I barely know him. You seemed intense. Combat changes a man, Marshall said again. Sometimes I forget how to turn it off. Jessica relaxed slightly. Maybe we should go. This place gives me the creeps anyway. Actually, I love it. Let's book it for the wedding. Marshall, I don't think. I insist. His voice carried a finality that made Jessica step back. This place is perfect for what I have in mind. Chapter 6. The Art of War. That evening, Marshall sat in his rental car outside Troy Warner's house, a modest suburban home where Troy lived with his wife Dolores and their 2 children. Through the lit windows, Marshall watched Troy attempt to maintain normalcy while clearly shaken from their afternoon encounter. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Miller's Diner, Route 9. Come alone. T. Marshall smiled. Troy was panicking, just as planned. Fear made people stupid, and stupid people made mistakes. Miller's Diner was a 24-hour truck stop on the outskirts of town. Marshall arrived to find Troy already there, hunched over coffee in a corner booth, looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. You came, Troy said as Marshall slid into the opposite seat. You asked nicely. Marshall signaled the waitress for coffee. What's on your mind, Troy? Look, I know what you think you know, but I don't think anything. I know everything. Marshall's voice was calm, conversational. I know you've been sleeping with my fiancée for 2 years. I know that's your baby she's carrying. I know about the plan to take my house, my savings, everything I've worked for. Troy's face crumpled. Ow! Because I'm very good at my job. And my job, Troy, is killing people who lie to me. Jesus Christ. He's not going to help you. Marshall leaned forward. But I might, if you're smart. Troy's eyes flicked up. What do you want? I want Jessica, but not the way you think. Marshall sipped his coffee calmly. I want her to suffer the way she made me suffer. I want her to feel what it's like to have everything she loves destroyed. I'm not going to help you hurt her. No. Let me tell you what's going to happen if you don't. Marshall's voice remained perfectly level. I'm going to destroy your marriage first. Photos of you and Jessica in bed, sent to your wife. Evidence of the baby, the affair, everything. Your wife will take your kids and half your assets. Troy was shaking now. You bastard. Then I'm going to destroy your business. A few words to the right people about your flexibility with property disclosures, your gambling debts, your financial irregularities. Real estate is built on trust, Troy. Once that's gone, you're finished. You can't. Then, Marshall continued as if Troy hadn't spoken. I'm going to destroy you personally. You see, I've learned some interesting things about you, Troy. That gambling problem? You owe money to some very unpleasant people. People who would be very interested to know about your little inheritance plan. Troy's face was white. Oh, what do you know about? I know everything, Troy. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Marshall reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Option 1. You disappear. Tonight. Leave town. Leave Jessica. Start over somewhere far away. There's a cashier's check in there for $50,000. More than enough to get lost permanently. Troy stared at the envelope. And if I don't? Option 2. You help me give Jessica exactly what she deserves. You play along with her plan, but with some modifications of my own. When it's over, you walk away with your life and your family intact. What kind of modifications? Marshall's smile was terrifying. The kind that will make her beg for the mercy I'm not going to give her. Troy was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. Finally, he looked up. What do you need me to do? First, you're going to convince Jessica to move the wedding to the Hartfield estate. Tell her it's perfect for the plan. Isolated, private, plenty of ways to make me disappear after she gets what she wants. Troy flinched. Make you disappear? Oh yes, Troy. Jessica's plan is more ambitious than you know. She's not planning to divorce me and take half. She's planning to become a grieving military widow with full benefits. A terrible accident on our honeymoon, perhaps. Or maybe a PTSD episode gone wrong. The color drained from Troy's face. She wouldn't. Check your phone. Troy pulled out his phone with trembling hands. Marshall had sent him a series of text screenshots, conversations between Jessica and her mother about permanent solutions and widow's benefits. Jesus, Troy whispered. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know she was planning. Now you do. Marshall leaned back. Still think she loves you, Troy? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're just as expendable as I am. How long before she decides you know too much? Troy was quiet for several minutes, processing this new information. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. What do you want me to do? Marshall smiled. I want you to be the perfect boyfriend, Troy. Support her plan, encourage her ambitions. And when the time comes, I want you to help me give her exactly what she's trying to give me. I won't be part of murder. Murder? Marshall looked genuinely surprised. Who said anything about murder? Troy, I'm not going to kill Jessica Clay. I'm going to do something much worse. What? I'm going to let her live with the consequences of her choices. Marshall stood, throwing a 20 on the table. You have 48 hours to decide, Troy. Choose wisely. Because unlike Jessica, I'm not planning to let you live with your mistakes. Chapter 7. The Perfect Wedding. 2 weeks later, the Hartfield estate buzzed with wedding preparations. Jessica had embraced the venue change with enthusiasm, seeing the isolation as perfect for the final phase of her plan. She'd even suggested making it a weekend-long celebration, with guests staying in the estate's guest quarters. Marshall stood in the mansion's library, adjusting his dress uniform in an antique mirror. Through the window, he could see guests arriving, family, friends, fellow soldiers on leave. People who genuinely cared about him and Jessica, who had no idea they were about to witness something that would haunt them forever. Preston entered, also in dress uniform. As Marshall's best man, he'd been privy to every detail of the plan. Everything's in position, he said quietly. Doug's team has the perimeter covered. No one's leaving early. The recording equipment? Every room, every conversation, audio and video. Preston checked his watch. Jessica's been busy this morning. 3 calls to her mother, 2 to her lawyer, 1 to a number we can't trace. Life insurance company, Marshall said without looking away from the mirror. Making sure all the paperwork is in order for her grieving widow act. You sure about this, brother? Once it starts, there's no going back. Marshall turned from the mirror. The man looking back at him was someone Preston barely recognized. Cold, calculating, utterly without mercy. I've been sure since the moment I read that text. Downstairs, the ceremony was beginning. Marshall took his position at the altar, looking out at the assembled guests. Jessica's family sat on one side, his on the other. Doug Emery and several other military friends were scattered throughout the crowd. Insurance, in case things went sideways. The music began, and Jessica appeared at the back of the aisle. She was radiant in white silk, her pregnancy barely showing, every inch the blushing bride. As she walked toward him, Marshall felt that familiar echo of love and crushed it ruthlessly. Troy Warner sat in the third row, his wife Dolores beside him, their children playing quietly in the aisle. Troy looked sick, barely holding himself together as he watched the woman he'd betrayed march toward her doom. The ceremony proceeded normally for the first 20 minutes. Marshall spoke his vows with apparent sincerity, watching Jessica glow with triumph as she recited hers. She was minutes away from becoming his legal wife, from gaining access to everything she'd plotted to steal. Then, as the minister reached the critical moment, Marshall raised his hand. "Wait," he said quietly. "Before we continue, there's something I need to share with everyone here." The minister looked confused. "Mr. Wyatt, this is highly irregular. I need to tell you all about the real Jessica Clay." Marshall's voice carried clearly through the hushed room. "The woman I fell in love with. The woman who doesn't exist." Jessica's face went white. "Marshall, what are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth, sweetheart. Something you've forgotten how to do." Marshall reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. With the press of a button, speakers throughout the estate crackled to life, playing the original text message in Jessica's own voice, enhanced and clarified. "He fell for it. He thinks the baby is his. We'll take his house and his savings after the wedding. That fool will be paying child support for another man's kid." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Gasps from the crowd, Jessica's family looking stricken, Marshall's friends rising from their seats in anger. Barbara Rogers tried to stand, but found herself gently but firmly restrained by Doug Emery. "That's not," Jessica started, but Marshall pressed the button again. This time, it was a recording of her conversation with her mother from that morning, discussing the accident they were planning for Marshall during the honeymoon. "You see," Marshall said conversationally, as chaos erupted around them, "I've spent the last month learning everything about the woman I was about to marry. Would you like to hear more?" "Marshall, please." Jessica was crying now, her perfect facade crumbling. "Did you know," Marshall continued, "that Jessica has been researching military widow benefits for 6 months? Or that she's been consulting with lawyers about how to claim my life insurance? Or that the baby she's carrying belongs to Troy Warner, who's sitting right over there with his real family?" Every eye in the room turned to Troy, who had gone pale as death. His wife Dolores stared at him in growing horror as the implication sank in. "Stop," Jessica whispered. "Please stop." "Why?" Marshall asked gently. "We're just getting to the good part." Chapter 8, The Reckoning. The estate's ballroom had been transformed from a wedding reception venue into something resembling a courtroom. Marshall's military friends had quietly positioned themselves at every exit, while Preston coordinated with local law enforcement who were stationed outside. Marshall stood at the center of the room, still in his dress uniform, facing Jessica, who sat in a chair like a defendant awaiting judgment. The wedding guests had been separated into groups, Jessica's co-conspirators on one side, innocent bystanders on the other. "Let's start with the timeline," Marshall said, consulting a tablet. 18 months ago, while I was deployed in Afghanistan, Jessica began her relationship with Troy Warner. Medical records show she conceived during this period, making it impossible for me to be the father. Dr. Sarah Kramer, Jessica's obstetrician, looked stricken from the crowd. "Jessica, you told me your fiancé was the father. I based all my recommendations on that information." 15 months ago, Marshall continued, Jessica began researching military benefits, specifically those available to widows of combat veterans. She also contacted 3 different law firms about property law and inheritance rights. Jessica's family lawyer, Rick Leonard, stood up from the crowd. "Jessica, what is this? You told me you needed advice about protecting your assets in case of your husband's deployment injury. 12 months ago, Jessica purchased a life insurance policy on me without my knowledge, listing herself as the sole beneficiary. She forged my signature on the application." Murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd. Insurance fraud was a felony, and everyone knew it. 6 months ago, Jessica began planning my death. Marshall's voice remained calm, professional. "Not just divorce, not just theft. Murder, carefully disguised as an accident during our honeymoon." Barbara Rogers finally found her voice. This is insane. Marshall, you're having some kind of breakdown. Am I? Marshall pressed another button on his device. Barbara's voice filled the room, crystal clear. The lake house will be perfect. Remote, no witnesses. Make it look like he went swimming and drowned. Happens to veterans all the time. PTSD, depression, they just give up. Barbara's face went ashen as her own words condemned her. 3 weeks ago, Marshall continued, Jessica contacted a private investigator, asking for someone who could arrange an accident for her husband. Unfortunately for her, that investigator was Doug Emery, my former squad leader. Doug stepped forward from the crowd. Jessica offered me $50,000 to kill her husband. She provided detailed plans, including how to make it look like suicide. I recorded everything. The room erupted in horrified whispers. Several guests looked physically ill. Troy Warner was staring at Jessica as if seeing her for the first time. You didn't know about that part, did you, Troy? Marshall asked gently. About the murder plan? You thought she just wanted to steal my money and leave me alive to pay child support. Troy shook his head mutely, his face a mask of revulsion. The beautiful thing about being a predator, Marshall said, is that you eventually reveal your true nature. Jessica couldn't help herself. She kept escalating, kept planning worse and worse betrayals, until she crossed lines that even her co-conspirators found unacceptable. Marshall walked over to Jessica, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think a man trained to hunt terrorists wouldn't notice when he was being hunted himself? I never meant, Jessica started. You never meant to get caught, Marshall corrected. But you meant everything else. Every lie, every deception, every plan to destroy me. He turned to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I've called you here today not just to witness this revelation, but to serve as a jury. Because Jessica Clay has committed crimes against all of us. She's made fools of my family, liars of her own, and potential accessories to murder of anyone who helped her. Marshall's voice hardened, but I'm not going to let the justice system handle this. They're too gentle, too forgiving. Jessica needs to understand what she's really done. What are you going to do? Jessica whispered. Marshall smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression anyone in the room had ever seen. I'm going to give you exactly what you gave me, Jessica. I'm going to destroy your entire life while leaving you alive to suffer through the consequences. Chapter 9. Justice Served Cold. 6 months later, Marshall Wyatt sat in a small cafe in downtown Nashville, reading a newspaper article about the final chapter of what the media had dubbed the Wedding Day Expose. The headline read, Former real estate agent sentenced to 10 years for insurance fraud conspiracy. Troy Warner had pled guilty to conspiracy charges, admitting his role in the plot to defraud Marshall's insurance companies. His wife Dolores had divorced him within a week of the wedding day revelations, taking their children and half his assets. His real estate license had been revoked, and he was now serving his sentence in federal prison. But Troy had gotten off easy compared to Jessica. Marshall turned the page to find another article. Mother-daughter conspiracy ring exposed in military benefits fraud. Barbara Rogers had been sentenced to 15 years for her role in organizing the murder plot. Her other assets had been seized under federal racketeering laws. Jessica Clay, who had reverted to her maiden name after their marriage, was declared invalid due to fraud, was serving a 25-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other charges. The baby, born in prison, had been placed for adoption. But the legal consequences were just the beginning of Marshall's revenge. Preston Wyatt entered the cafe and slid into the opposite booth. The last transfer went through this morning, he reported. The house, the cars, everything in Jessica's name has been liquidated and donated to military widows' assistance programs. Marshall nodded with satisfaction. Every asset Jessica had tried to steal had been legally claimed as evidence, then donated to help real military widows, the very people Jessica had tried to defraud. What about the estate? Marshall asked. Purchased and converted into a veterans retreat center. Doug's running it now, helping soldiers transition back to civilian life. Preston smiled grimly. We named it the Jessica Clay Memorial Center for Honesty and Integrity. Marshall actually laughed at that. The first genuine laugh Preston had heard from his brother since the deployment. And the insurance companies? Pursuing civil suits against everyone involved. Even if Jessica ever gets out of prison, she'll spend the rest of her life paying restitution. Preston paused. Marshall, there's something else. Troy Warner tried to contact you from prison. He wants to apologize. Marshall's expression hardened. No forgiveness. No second chances. He made his choice. I figured. Just thought you should know. Preston studied his brother's face. You feel better? Getting all this justice. Marshall considered the question. Did he feel better? The hollow ache of betrayal was gone, replaced by a cold satisfaction. Jessica Clay had learned what happened when someone tried to prey on Marshall Wyatt. The lesson had cost her everything. Her freedom, her child, her future, her hope. I feel balanced, Marshall said finally. The scales are even now. A young waitress approached their table, nervous about interrupting. Excuse me, are you Marshall Wyatt? The soldier from the news? Marshall tensed, but the woman's expression was one of admiration, not judgment. I just wanted to thank you, she continued. My husband was killed in Iraq 3 years ago, and I've been struggling with his benefits. The foundation you set up, the one funded by, well, it saved my life. My kids and I will have lost our house without that help. Marshall looked up at her, seeing genuine gratitude in her eyes. What's your name? Christy Rollins. My husband was Sergeant Michael Rollins, 82nd Airborne. I knew Mike, Marshall said quietly. He was a good soldier, a good man. Tears filled Christy's eyes. He always said the worst thing about serving wasn't the danger. It was worrying that if something happened to him, we'd be forgotten. But because of what you did, because you caught those people trying to steal benefits meant for families like mine, we're not forgotten. After she left, Preston looked at his brother with new understanding. That's why you did all this. Not just for revenge. Justice, Marshall corrected. Revenge is personal. Justice serves a larger purpose. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Doug Emery. New group of vets arriving at the center tomorrow. 3 combat veterans, all struggling with reintegration. Thanks to your funding, we can help them rebuild their lives. Marshall smiled and replied, Keep up the good work. Let me know if you need anything. As they left the cafe, Preston asked, What's next for you? Back to active duty. Marshall shook his head. I'm transitioning out. Go to work with Doug at the center. Turns out hunting predators translates, well, to hunting the demons that chase veterans home from war. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, 2 brothers who had weathered the storm together. Preston said finally, For what it's worth, I think Jessica Clay got exactly what she deserved. Marshall stopped walking and looked back toward the federal courthouse visible in the distance, where Jessica was serving her sentence. She got exactly what she gave me, Preston. She destroyed everything I believed in, so I destroyed everything she valued. She tried to steal my future, so I erased hers. She wanted to make me suffer for the rest of my life, so I made sure she would suffer for the rest of hers. And you don't feel bad about any of it? Marshall's expression was stone. I feel like a soldier who completed his mission. Nothing more, nothing less. As they drove away, Marshall thought about the last conversation he'd had with Jessica through the prison glass partition. She'd been a broken woman by then. All her schemes collapsed. All her dreams turned to ash. I'm sorry, she'd whispered through the phone. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry. Marshall had looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had once made him believe in love and hope and a future worth fighting for. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust, Jessica. Sorry doesn't give me back the months I spent believing your lies. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you tried to have me murdered. I know. I need you to know I never meant for it to go that far. Yes, you did. Every choice you made led to that moment. Every lie, every deception, every betrayal. You built this prison cell with your own hands. Jessica had started crying then, but Marshall felt nothing. The woman he'd loved had never existed. The woman sitting across from him was a stranger who had stolen her face. Will you ever forgive me? She'd asked. Marshall